Ready? Aim!
There's too many!
Anyone see my mammoth?
Stumpy! Hello! Hello there. You'll probably notice that we are slightly late today. And more than that, you'll probably notice there's a big black box over there. For whatever reason, Discord has been absolutely... yeah, see, Dan knows where it's at. Discord's been an absolute pain for us tonight. And I'm sat there listening to Carlo talk, and he can't hear me at all. We've tried lots of things. I don't know what it is, but for whatever reason, Carlo can't seem to hear me at all, which is weird. No idea what's going on there. So yeah, we were having some technical issues. Annoyingly, that does actually mean that Carlo literally is in chat, as I'm about to show you all in this lovely little thing here. Let's hopefully this works first time. He'll probably load up. So here he is loading in. His camera will probably load up in a second. But yeah, so we can't really have a big conversation because we can't hear each other. Well, I can hear him. He can't hear me. Which is going to be difficult. Very, very difficult. So, with that in mind, I am just kind of going to go it alone, see what happens, talk about the things I was going to talk about before. Wow, I just had a lovely sound in my ears. That was lovely. He is here. There you go. He is present, but alas, he won't be able to take part. So he'll probably be watching it on record, and if he wants to add anything in, he'll add anything in. But because of that, today was actually going to be a short episode anyway, because in case people hadn't guessed, there has been basically no news this week. And with there being basically no news, it means that there's basically nothing to talk about, right? Now, of course, because there's nothing to talk about, there's always something for us to cover. Hey, that old classic. The first thing is a piece of news that is important to everybody in the entire world, be it Song of Ice and Fire or anything else. In that, I now have a box of Flayed Men, so that means I will probably play other factions now a little bit more. Rip Free Folk, they're going back in the cupboard over there. Look, Carlo feels like an absolute bystander today. Oh, I'm sorry, Carlo. Yeah, Flayed Men have been purchased, Flayed Men have been owned, oh, cool. And we've got some good news. I think if I do this, Carlo can actually hear me now. Let's put it down to that. You've been here for ages. Yeah, cool. So, is this going to work? This is all right, yeah? This is all right. We can manage. Maybe. We'll see. Cool. So, the other piece of news has been that it is actually been a bloody horrible day in the UK, so our part of the world. It's been misty and horrible, which means that the world has come to a slightly worse place. Yes, all those things. So if the internet goes off or anything, you know it's because we live in a bad part of the UK with bad weather. All right then. So, how are you doing, Carlo? Odd that you mentioned painting. I have literally just undercoated or spray painted some Greyjoy miniatures for my first foray into painting up Greyjoys. Because sod finishing the Free Folk, because they're not going to hit the table for at least a couple of months, I imagine. So I'm going to start painting Greyjoys now. The plan, no promises I'm even going to take Greyjoys. The plan is to have a finished army by the time, for Greyjoys, at least one list, to be finished for Always Winter. Regardless of if I even take them, I'll have a painted Greyjoy list for Always Winter. No. Not a fully painted one across two lists. Jesus, who do you think I am? Leet Teddy? um, so, yeah, that's my current project there. So I'm glad you've got back into painting because I think it is an important thing, obviously. All right then. So today's main meat and potatoes, which I was going to talk to Carlo a little bit before about the show regarding, but alas, technical difficulties and all that, is about learning the game, and specifically. One of the comments that was kind of mentioned on the last episode was that we talked about effectively why me and Carlo don't think Champions of the Stag are an issue or Rose Knights are an issue when it comes to dealing with them, and how we talked about how good players kind of just know their weaknesses and can play around them. And Steve also sending me a message there saying painted, ha ha ha, implying that I'm going to have anything painted. So yeah, yeah, it was a case of like me and Carlo said, Champions of Stag, easy, you just kind of do this, or specifically Rose Knights, easy, you just kind of do this, and we kind of took it for granted, I guess, how you would counteract these things. So Carlo, today's topic about learning and about getting better at the game, right? General tips and tricks and advice. Where would you start off with? Is your main piece of advice? Okay. Yes. Yeah. That is something I agree 100% with. I think because I used to. I mean, Carlo can attest to this. I used to be very heavily based around, oh, I lost because of this thing, or I lost because of this thing. That's a problem. Like that is a problem. Um, so yeah, like that being an issue is I don't know why. God, I don't know why. Hang on, 2 seconds. I will definitely fix that one. Um, there we go. They can hear you now.
And
They definitely
the
can.
people here. Yeah, smile and wave.
Smile and wave, boys. Smile and wave. God, oh, this is what happens when we get small technical difficulties. Just everything goes to pot. But hey, we continue. So yeah, you said that the best thing to do would be to play and lose, and don't attribute it to luck, like a bad dice roll.
Yeah, try and understand why. Try and understand why you've lost. Analyze why you're losing. There can be loads of reasons. It can be individual bad plays where you can, and when when you watch a game from the outside and you're more experienced, it's quite easy to point to a particular move where I can be like, well, he pretty much lost the game at this point. In my mind, that's not always the same for everybody. You know, like everybody might not agree that that was a game lost at that point, but things become significantly more difficult from that point onwards. There may be other mistakes that happen, but pretty much like basically that's a mistake that you can't make again in the future. You need to be able to learn to like see them and not do them. It can go back as far as like you lost at the list selection point. You know, like that is possible. You could even have lost at the list writing phase. You know, like your two lists might both just be bad. Never mind like bad into the matchup or bad into the game mode. So there are a whole range of reasons why people lose. Luck is almost never one of them. And realistically, if luck is actually the reason why you lost, say it came down like, you know, like the only time when people really ascribe like luck to being the reason they lost is, oh, you know, I failed like a 50-50 morale test at the end of the game and therefore I lost. I literally would have won if I'd held that token or if I'd made this charge, which was like a 4+ or something like that. But if your game is coming down to that single dice roll, then there were almost definitely mistakes earlier that you could have rectified, which meant that the game didn't come down to that dice roll. And so you can't ascribe the game to that piece of luck which you focused the entire game onto, because there were other things that you could have done which meant that the win was guaranteed and there was no luck involved.
It's also, you know, there's also a chance where if it does come down to like the luck of one roll at the end of the game, and Carlo's definitely said this before, that probably means that the only difference between you and your opponent is one dice roll in terms of like skill of that in that particular game, in terms of that game's performance. So as a result, yes, you were unlucky, your opponent was lucky, whatever you want to call it, but actually you've got two players who in that game performed at basically an equal level. And you know, that to some extent is almost the perfect game. Almost. You know, one person may have made more mistakes, but if two players are performing at the same level, that's kind of exactly what you want out of a game, to have it as close as it can possibly be. And then the winner will be decided by a 50-50. But that's because nothing else can separate the two players.
I mean, that's what we want as hobbyists.
Yes,
as a competitive gamer, as a competitive gamer, you want the game to be all but 100% in your control.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to be as good as the person that you're playing. You want to be winning 99% of the games against the person that you're playing, because you know unless and you know that could be the best or second best person in your area. That could be the best or second best person in the world. Do you know what I mean? What you want is you want to be able to say that, like, with a very strong consistency, I can beat. I would like to be.
Yeah.
And if that's not the case, if you've lost on a 50-50, that's because you are only equally as good as whoever you played against that day. And so unless you knowingly went into the game handicapping yourself with a bad list because you were looking to improve and you were looking to bring the game down into a 50-50 kind of like, can I test myself here? Then you're now basically in a learning situation of like, well, what could I have done to make the game a guarantee? What can I do to ensure that I will always beat this person in future? Because as a competitive player, if you want to be better, then that's where you want to be. You want to go into a tournament knowing that you can, you know, outside of extreme luck, you will win your games.
Yeah. And also, a big thing for me as well is taking that opportunity to learn. Now, it's different for everybody, and I know that not everyone has exactly the same attitude towards this. Some people will lose a game, and the last thing they want to do is discuss the game. They actually just want to be able take 5 minutes away from the game, 10 minutes, whatever it might be, to go and get some fresh air, some space to breathe, so they can think about it, so they can process that loss. Some people will end a game and go, "Oh, that was cool. Where do you think it went wrong?" And some people absolutely fine going straight into a discussion. You see this a lot in chess. The top grandmasters in chess events will play sometimes like 6 hours, remember, for these chess games, and then they'll tidy up, and then they'll go back, and then they'll have a little chat, not even 5 minutes, and they'll talk about a position and be like, "Oh, you should have played like knight to a4 in that particular move or that particular instance," and then they discuss the two different lines or the options that they thought, and usually one of them will come out with "Oh yeah, you're probably right. That was probably a mistake. I probably should have done that." And sometimes doing that with your opponent, if you've got a couple of minutes after a game to go, where do you think I went wrong? What do you think was like a key mistake during the gameplay? And sometimes that can be very beneficial. But of course, not everyone wants to have that conversation. Even if it's just a case where, you sit and you kind of like process what you've done and you try and work out your own mistakes as well. During the GT, when I lost to Chris F&M, I kind of sat there looking at the board for about 5-10 minutes afterwards because I was trying to work out, right, why did I make the mistake I made? Identified the mistake and went, right, okay, how do I protect against that again? How do I prevent myself making that same mistake? And then what kind of issues did that mistake lead to? So I was also playing it out in my head, like if I hadn't have allowed him to do this and I'd have done this, what happens there? What's the outcome? So I'm trying to work out not just where the mistake was, but also what issues the mistake creates that I've not thought about at that time that I then have to potentially resolve. So I'm thinking about not just the one mistake, but maybe 2 or 3 kind of cascading mistakes that happen from a simple problem. Not everyone wants to do that, and it is completely reasonable to say to people that they don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about a game they lost. But actually, as Carlo points out, it's the games you lose where you probably can learn the most from. Sometimes, that being said, sometimes you can learn something from a game you've won because it is possible to accidentally make good moves. Like that is a thing.
I mean, it's easier to learn. It's easier to learn from a close win where you made mistakes.
Yes.
The ideal situation, if you're a competitive player and you like to win and stuff like that, is close, hard fought wins where you get the win, you get to feel good about the game, you get to enjoy it, you get all those good bits, and you also maybe made a mistake and got away with it. But as long as you acknowledge that you made a mistake and the game could have been better, you can still learn. But to be honest, like if you're of a singular mindset that you want to, like, you actually really want to be a better player, chances are that like losing is what crystallizes the mistake as something that you actually remember.
Yeah.
I see this a lot with people who like who let people take things back and go backwards. They never learn from those mistakes. They've missed timings and stuff like that. But the fact that they never force the person to learn that that was a mistake and you can't go backwards means that like they continue to do it again and again and again because they don't crystallize it with the pain of defeat, right? Like the defeat itself is what will remind you not to do it again. As long as you care somewhat about losing, right? Like, you know, if this is the whole thing about like casual playing, which, like, you know, I just don't get. I just don't understand the mindset of like I understand that there's problems with like win at all costs. Anybody who cheats to win is pathetic, and do you know what I mean? Like, actually, just like, what the fuck are you doing with your life if you're cheating to win at Toy Soldiers, right? But above that standard of not cheating, you should want to win, because if you don't want to win, I personally don't understand why you play, because wanting to win is what makes the game interesting.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like, we might as well be playing a cooperative RPG. You know what I mean? Like, like really, like, I understand that some people enjoy that, but why are you playing a competitive tabletop game if that's what you want, right? Like, if you want to play a story and see these characters do something, then play a computer game, play an RPG, play something else. Is my mindset towards it. So I think that losing is a very, very important part of that, because as long as you care a little bit that you lost, you can care too much about losing.
Yeah.
That can make people really, really bad losers. It can make people really, really like unenjoyable opponents, and at that point, you're not going to be able to find as many good opponents to play against, and it will be detrimental to like your improvement of the game, because people just don't want to play you if you're a really, really sour loser. But there has to be an amount that you want to not lose. There has to be an amount that when you do lose, it stays in your mind, and you think, I don't want that to happen again. And you have to just be sensible about analyzing why it happened and not emotional. You have to be like, realistically analytical, and it can be very, very hard because especially if you're emotional about losing. But as people have said, like having some kind of footage of the game helps a lot if you wanted to go back later and see, because watching yourself play, you'll see things that you didn't see at the time, and that can be quite different. That can help a lot, especially if we're talking about wanting to analyze and improve when you won, because that's when you're most likely to see that, yes, I did win, but I could have done something better. Whereas a loss normally has, our memories aren't perfect, but it crystallizes that point of failure, and you remember the things that you really just don't want to do again in the future.
Now, Kurt in chat says there's something to be said for your opponent making a good play, and it's not necessarily always a mistake that you lose the game with, which is true. Sometimes your opponent's good play, and here's the way I would put it: is sometimes your opponent makes a good play. That is true. It's your response to that play that is the mistake. Was your response the right response? And sometimes, and there is things, and if we're talking about certain games, certain list building, and all these things, we can talk about, sometimes the list selection is the mistake, not the fact that you couldn't respond to a good play or that you didn't think about it. Because sometimes, and I will use the example here of if you're playing against Mance, sometimes a Mance player will do something that's just objectively very good, and you can't respond because that's kind of the whole point of the lists. And as a result, you can sit there.
It's a very good thing picking Mance.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, but not that. But like during the actual gameplay, they'll execute well, and then you'll lose a game, and it's like, yeah, I couldn't have stopped that. And sometimes the mistake was you weren't playing Mance in this particular matchup. And sometimes, and that's just something you accept and you move on from, and you go, you know what? I didn't make a mistake. I've looked at the game. I've not made a single mistake. My opponent almost played flawlessly. Does that happen often? No, that doesn't happen often, but it can happen, where it's basically flawless play. And as a result, the mistake was a mistake that you actually quantifiably knew, which was I didn't pick the best possible thing, and as a result, I lost this very close game. And I made it close, but I still lost. And sometimes that's fine. And those are just games you accept, and you go, oh well, you know what? There's no learning opportunity there for me, but you move on to the next one. You also don't have to walk away from that feeling angry or upset or frustrated, because in the end of the day, that is what it is. It's the games where that isn't the case. You had a 2-list format, you looked at your opponent's 2 lists and went, I'm going to pick this one. And they're probably going to pick this one, and then they pick the other one, and it throws you a curveball, and all of a sudden you're looking at it thinking, Christ, I don't have the right tools for this matchup. Stuff like that you need to think about. And then, obviously reviewing. Now, of course, we talk about winning or losing.
So I have quite a different view on what he's saying there, which is, for a start, if you blame luck,
Yeah.
Coming back to the luck idea, if you blame luck for the reason why you lose, then that is very detracting of the fact that, well, if the game did come down to a 50-50, then your opponent had at least as much skill as you in the game, right?
Yeah.
So you have to accept, like, when people say, like, XYZ got lucky, that person got lucky for, well, you're basically saying that person's just as good as you, right? Like, they made plays just as good as the plays that you made. So if they're not good and just got lucky, then you are also not good.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that part's really important. That like you need to accept the skill of other players as one of the reasons why you lose. But that said, I actually completely disagree with what you're saying about Mance because, and I mean, I've played the best lists in the game too, right? This isn't a Mance problem, right? If you bring the best list to the table, in my opinion, there is no brilliant play that you can make. Flat out. Like, I literally believe that there is no brilliant play that you can make. Only the person who is at a disadvantage by lists can make great plays.
That's fair enough.
That's the way this game works in my mind. The person who has a significantly better list than their opponent, and outside of maybe Ulla Martels, which is a whole thing which I haven't yet really discovered and haven't had a chance to look at and whatever. Outside of that, there is nothing that compares close to what Mance has been doing for the past edition. Mance player does not make good plays, they just don't fuck up.
Sure. Okay.
And if you bring, and this isn't a Mance only thing, like sometimes when I go to lesser tournaments that are less hard, or like I'm playing people early in, right? Like I look at the list and I'm like, Jesus, mate, your lists are bad, right? And I put my army on the table, and then I win the game. I haven't made any great plays, right?
Yeah.
Like I just don't fuck up. It's as simple as that. Like
that's fair enough. If you want to define it that way, then I can't disagree at all. In that a great play can only ever be made by effectively the person who's behind, in a way of like recovering some level of positional or disadvantage. A great play is taking you from a disadvantaged position to a better position. That doesn't mean it's not disadvantaged still, but a less of a disadvantage. Cool. I'm happy with that. Yeah, that's fine.
And I think if you start to see the game in that way and start to understand it, when you do have the advantage and that you don't have to make any great plays, you don't have to find greatness. Mm-hmm. All you have to do is maintain the advantage that you already have, which is a list state at the start of the game, but it's also a continuous state throughout the game. Like luck can put you ahead, and then all you've got to do is maintain that same situation, maintain that same advantage now for the rest of the game. You don't need to make a great play or your opponent makes a mistake or something like that, right? Which allows you to become the new dominant player.
Yeah.
A dominant. You can be overly cautious. Of course, some people just look to be overly cautious and just try and maintain a very, very slim advantage and don't see that they're now allowing their opponent in. But once you're up, and often it's, like the first unit that dies or something like that, right? Like, which can put somebody up. You don't need to make anything big happen from now on. All you have to do is just make consistently okay plays. Like, the game isn't that inventive. The game isn't that crazily, like, people just keep making the same moves. Like, people keep making the same moves. Like, they're not. There's not a world of opportunities in this game.
No, I mean, we're all playing on. Okay, it's not a square-based grid, but you can kind of imagine it a little bit of a square-based grid, and sure, there's the intricacies of, I'm 1 or 2 inches here, or 1 or 2 millimeters of a position, the millimeters of an angle here. But on the most part, it's stuff you've seen before. It's you either doing this thing or not doing this thing. It's this weirdness that sometimes you see where some people are, and it happens on TTS actually a lot, where some people are weirdly precise about moves which I think that certainly me and Carlo sometimes look at. They're weirdly precise about moves that are basically unimportant, and really imprecise on moves that are, which is really weird. That just might be me. I've seen that a lot though. Yeah, it's but there you go. So learning 101, first lesson. Look back on mistakes and review games, think about what you've done. But there's also other learning, right? Watching other people's games can help you learn. Identifying mistakes in their gameplay, not to then talk to them about it. Like, this is the weird thing. You don't necessarily have to talk to that player about their mistakes. Sometimes just talking about their mistakes with somebody else who perhaps watched is a good way of reviewing it. When myself and Larks watched back the final of LGT, Sławek versus Jacob, we sat back and we watched and we discussed why Jacob lost and why Sławek was winning, and we discussed the mistakes. I've never mentioned those mistakes to Jacob. That's on him if he wants to ask, or if he wants to go review it and back. I'm not imposing that learning on him, but me and Larks wanted to watch the game, and we wanted to discuss and learn from that game if there was anything that was a key moment. We did that. We had that discussion. We learnt. We didn't take part in the game. That has just as much value. I do recommend talking with players over recorded games. Just watching a recorded game on your own is not always going to be the best way of that learning being there. Being able to bounce ideas, it depends how you learn, it depends how you kind of analyze. Being able to bounce ideas off other players is quite important. Mainly because
Dan's right, total nerds.
Total nerds. Yeah.
I mean, it's not. It's not about being a nerd. I actually totally disagree. Which is,
right.
I don't give a fuck what anybody else thinks about this game. Like, I really genuinely don't.
That's fair enough.
Like, I could not give. So this is what I think is important about this, which is, to me, I don't give a fuck what Mickey would do in XYZ position, because in XYZ position in 3 games' time, it's not Mickey making the decision. It's me. So I care about what I would choose, and if my decision making then leads to what I think is going to be success. And if not, then I will change my decision making, and I will change my opinion of maybe the units aren't as strong as I think, maybe the move isn't as powerful as I think, it's more risky than I think. Maybe I go and look at more or less killy, and I realize, I thought that was like gonna do, like my quick head maths had that at doing like 6 wounds, but actually it turns out that only does 4.5 wounds. So I was really hoping for like that would have been incredibly lucky for me to like 2-tap that unit, get 6 wounds each time, kill it with 2 attacks. When the reality is that the average is it only does 9 wounds. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, of course it didn't work. Like, I was hoping for a bit of a miracle there. So it's not that other people don't have valid opinions about the game. It's that I don't care what those opinions are, because they're never going to be the one making those choices in my games. I'm the only one who's going to make those decisions in my games. Mm-hmm. So I have never sought out the help of somebody else on decision making or what to do in certain situations. I've only ever tried to look at what other people have done, decide if I think it's good or not, and decide if it's a move which I also would like to use in the future.
Okay.
So I very much disagree on it, on that principle, which is, like I don't care what other people say they would do, because it's just an opinion. I care about seeing it happen and whether or not I then think that was a likely outcome or not. Otherwise, it's just an opinion of something that could have happened and will never really, we'll never know whether or not it would have been better or not. unless it's just factually better because it's a mistake, in which case, well, it's a mistake.
Do you think that there's value in at least somewhat having those chats, because there may be options that you hadn't even considered, and then that consideration of that option, which again doesn't necessarily happen, would be something that ends up changing your game play, if you will, in the future? Because you got, a very good example might be for a newer player, they might say, oh, I didn't know what to do. I was faced with Rose Knights, I charged them in the front, or they charged me, and then I was like, oh god, I just hit them back and I didn't do anything, and then I suffered all this kind of like negative attrition and things like that. Whereas realistically, saying something like, well, did you consider retreating, might actually be a learning opportunity for that individual. So the option of like, did you consider this XYZ as something that you would share with other people?
No, because either the move is something that people are doing,
Yep.
and I will see it because I consume enough
Content.
content, shall we say? Like, I watch enough games, right? Like, this is either a thing which I see happen and I decide. Like I say, there are no magic moves that you've never considered in this game, right?
No.
There are ones which you might not have thought about in a certain situation, right? Like, that's because you're just not familiar with like people using that tactic on a regular basis. Like, there are no like truly inspired moves. There aren't any queen sacrifices in the Song of Ice and Fire, right? Like, there's no queen sacrifice that's actually a bait play that is like some other thing, because that's not how things progress, right? Like, that's not the way this game moves. And so no, like, and it's not, and just to be really clear, it's not that I don't think that other people's opinions are valid, right? Like, I do think that they are, and it's not because I believe that I'm the best player in the world and that other people couldn't have a better idea, right? It's that, would I care to interact with other people? No, as a general rule, no, I don't want to interact with other people, Marley. Here's the choice. No, it's that if it's not an original thought that I have at this moment, then it's also not going to be an original thought that I'm going to have in the future. So, like, I think you're fooling yourself if you think that you can be another player just because you've spoken to another player and they said, oh, I would have done X.
Sure. But then, like, by that definition, it almost feels like you can't train yourself to play differently.
You can lose. You can lose and you can learn.
Sure. Sure.
Like.
Yeah. But then I do think there is a lot of value. Dan, people do know Carlo is a sociopath. This is true. I do think there's value in it to some extent. I think that there is value in, really what we're trying to teach here is not what you would do in this situation, but perhaps how you think about the game, and the way that the game is thought about is actually one of the biggest things you need to learn. Because if you change your thinking and mindset, that will probably open more doors than just, oh, you can either retreat here or do an attack. As you say, there aren't many options in the game, but actually the way you evaluate options, which comes from a mindset change, might be the thing you actually need to learn, more so than the options available, if you know what I mean.
I mean, obviously there are things that a very mediocre player who like literally has no concept that this move is viable or legal or can do whatever. Like, we're talking about oh, I didn't even know that unit did that. I didn't know they had that rule. I didn't know that would work that way, right? Like, there are things that you can learn from interacting with other people. Things that people can say, like, oh, this unit's good because it has this, by the way. And you're like, oh, I didn't even know it had that or it could do that, right? And there are things that people who don't know tons about the game can learn from just listening to people who do know tons about the game, right? Like, that part is obviously true, right? Like, and if somebody has never retreated before, all they ever do is attack, then obviously the first time someone says, you know, you could retreat and it might be better for you there, then yes, that really can open somebody's mind to like something new they'd never thought about.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that in the specific case of you're number 3 in the world and number 8 in the world or 7 or whatever Larks is, sitting and talking about what they would do when watching number 2 in the world play number 4 in the world, it's like you guys have all the information available. I do not believe that the rate of learning is any higher than if you just made the decision yourself. I think you're just looking for social. You're looking for like social confirmation that things that you think are good moves, right? Like.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, it's the not necessarily social confirmation, but it's the social interaction. Talking with another good player about how they would approach that situation. Like, knowing about someone's approach is a part of learning, right? How would you appreciate this situation? Not just what decision would you make, but like how would you approach the thinking about his? Do you think this is a good game state for you? Yes or no? As X player or Y player. Like, I do think there is value in that. You know,
there is value in everything, though. The point, like the thing, we can find value in everything. It's what is
the fastest.
Depending on how much time that you want to spend getting better at this game. Like, what are the most productive things that you can do during that time, right? Like, and so just sitting with a Discord stream of a game being played, which you glance off over on your second screen every couple of minutes and go, all right, that's happening, is like, the lowest possible form of learning.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And I do that a lot because, like I'm working or whatever, and I take that as like literally one notch higher, which is before the game starts, I predict who's going to win. I roughly speaking predict how long it will take them to win. And then I look back and decide whether or not that's still the case. Right? But like, I'm not analyzing any given move that they're making. I'm not learning from any plays. I'm not even really thinking about whether or not X unit beats Y unit. Do you know what I mean? I'm like,
just
how,
literally
what card.
Passively.
I'm just thinking. Passively, I take a rough gauge of the players and their lists and the scenario and how I think it's going to play out after I see deployment.
Yeah.
And it helps me to inform my ideas about like what are good lists, what are good players, but it's like literally like one notch higher than basically having zero interest in the game.
Yeah.
Which is you are technically going to learn something if you like if you listen to the players play for a start, right? But like on Discord specifically, they're giving information to each other about them playing, which is all, well, except for a couple of cases which actually really annoy me, which is weird actually, which is I hate people discussing tactics with their opponent. I fucking hate that. I don't know why I hate it so much, but like it comes back to this idea like you should be wanting to win the game. Like why do like relatively competitive players sit and talk about tactics, about moves 2 goes ago or something like that? Anyway, totally different thought. Point is like the things that they are discussing and like that you can listen to and hear, they help you keep track of what's going on in the game, but they give you no tactical insight because good players, in my opinion, are not giving any tactical insight when they open their mouth to their opponent. So yeah, like that's like the lowest level of like lowest level of learning, lowest rate of learning, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I would say probably the highest rate of learning is analyzing your own gameplay.
Yeah.
Right, like,
that
so
is big.
back to my first point, which is like, like losing and analyzing why you did it in a very non-emotional way. And there's a whole range of things in between, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, which we can talk about, and they're all valuable. Somewhere in there is just like sitting and reading tactics cards,
Mm-hmm.
sitting and like looking at every unit in the game and remembering what abilities they have.
Rule
right?
interactions. Like, Jesus Christ, there's one.
yeah. Like sitting and reading the FAQ because it might give you some new ideas. Honestly, genuinely, the one that so many people give so little value to. Read the fucking rules. Most people have never sat down and read the rule book, right?
Yeah.
And they're getting scammed. They're getting scammed left, right, and center by people who are telling them the rules, and they're not right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
they need to learn the rules so that when somebody cheats, they just say, that's not the rules, you're cheating, right? Okay? And all of those things, right, for a start, people don't really want to accept, but they're significantly higher on the getting better scale than incredibly passively watching a Discord stream.
Mm-hmm.
Or
a battle report.
Incredibly passively watching a battle report.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing. I know that a lot of people use battle reports as like background listening for things like painting and stuff, which is absolutely fine. It's better to have that passively going on in the background if you want to pick up little things, because there might be a moment and you're like, oh, that's quite an interesting position. I'll have a little look at that for 2 or 3 minutes. Oh, look, cool. And now I'll go back to this. But yeah, that is going to probably be the lowest level. Just because you're not paying attention, you're not putting that brain power to the game that you would when you actually play. A lot of people say this, when they play, they drink a huge amount of liquids during like a tournament weekend. And it's because you're using your brain a lot. Like, even though games might be easy games for you as a player, you'll still be thinking a lot. So drinking, so drinking water is important. Yeah, I am gonna call out Dan on that one because that is a legit thing. Or call out Carlo. Carlo was playing Davos this weekend on Friday night, and I actually think he got it right. In the first game he played, he did actually remove Final Strike, and in the second game,
yeah, Dan made me move tables, so I had my deck and Final Strike next to it, and all the cards were everywhere. So I just picked up my deck and shuffled it, and then I happened to end up with 22 cards in the deck that time. because I forgot that I had removed Final Strike, and it was next to my discard pile.
It was a genuine mistake.
Yeah.
But it was quite funny.
Obviously, this was the first and second times that I'd ever played Davos. So then, obviously, when I drew Final Strike, I didn't instantly think, "Oh, I shouldn't have Final Strike," because, I mean, I'm playing Baratheons. Of course, I should have Final Strike.
Yeah.
So yeah, I then proceeded to hold on to Final Strike for 3 rounds, waiting to play it.
That was the funny bit, is because you realised and went, "Oh yeah, shit." And not only threw away one. Did you have both copies in your hand when it just happened?
I had both copies of Final Strike.
Oh, rip.
Yeah. And Dan kept causing like 2 wounds on an attack, and I was like, nah, that's not worth Final Strike. I'll keep it for later. And then drew another one, and I was like, well, now I've got 2 of the fuckers. And then I eventually, was like, well, I'll play it on this crap attack. And that's when it was like, you don't have Final Strike in your deck. And I was like, ah.
There's that moment.
Anyway,
yeah. But yeah, no, genuine mistakes as well. That's the thing, right? That's another thing as well, is just like genuine mistakes for whatever reason happen during games. Gameplay mistakes where you thought about something wrong, or there's lots of issues there. But there's also genuine mistakes where you do something, and then a couple of minutes later you're like, oh crap, I know I've messed it up because I was planning to do something. Happens all the time with like a missed trigger or something like that. So those things are a lot harder to actually train out of you, because those are, in case people didn't know, genuine mistaken moments can happen basically everybody makes them every single day of their lives, and you can actually work out. There's a weird coefficient that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head, but you can actually work out the number of genuine mistakes that you'll make a day. And the thing is that you won't notice you've made them, and that's why it's a horrible thing a lot of the time. So there are things like that which you can't necessarily do a lot about, aside from just double checking, being like, is this what I want to do? Yes or no?
Well,
Always do those things.
again, other than Mickey's bullshit coefficient,
I'll try and find it. I'll try and find it because it is really interesting.
I actually really disagree, which is I think there is a really big thing that you can do about them, which, and again, comes back to the idea that I think that the person who is in control of the game, the person who is winning, is in a much, much, much easier situation because all they have to do is not forget their triggers. That's all they have to do.
Yeah, that's one
because
thing.
they are winning, right? And that's why I think the list selection and game balance are so important. Because the person who comes in playing Mance, knowing that if nothing changes, they have basically won. All they have to do is they just have to sit there and all their brain power is just don't fuck up, don't miss Warcry. Like when they attack, play coordination tactics. You know, they can just sit there and that's all they have to think. All you have to think is don't fuck up. Don't forget these things. The other person is like, how the fuck do I win? What big play do I have to make, right? And this is why I say that only the person in the losing situation can make great plays. Because the person who is winning, if they can actually understand that they're winning, is basically able and should put all their brain power into ensuring that they maintain the status quo, and the status quo is about not making mistakes. Again, like I use Mance because he is the clear, outright example for the past 6 months that if you're playing him, there is no game other than the mirror match where you should be thinking about anything other than these things. But there are plenty of the whole thing's a grayscale. There are plenty of times, and you know, most tournaments I go to and most games that I play in tournaments against people that I've never played before, I am trying to put myself into the situation where I am this player, right? The difference being that that's a grayscale, not a 100% fact going into the game, right? So I hope that after list selection, I'm like, okay, I've got 9 activation John, he's got 7 activation crap. All I've got to do is don't fuck up the order of Relentless. Don't go for an attack that leads to like me triggering something. Like, so, you know, I'm there like, remember Final Strike, remember Final Strike. It will totally wipe you out, right? And if you're then in that semi-dominant situation, once you're confident in your gameplay and you understand what the pitfalls are, and you're playing high-performance lists, and this is why high-performance lists are actually so important. Grayscale, yeah. Big accidental law reference, Marvin. People play those lists not because they are... They play those lists because they allow you to think differently about the gameplay, and they allow you to be a better player because they allow you to not have to make big plays, not have to make risky plays. They allow you to just be in control and be relaxed about whatever's about to come because you're confident that everything that you do, you just need to ensure that your opponent doesn't make a big play. And it's much, much easier in the current rule set, particularly. Going way back to like 1.6, it was not so much the case because the game was incredibly explosive and incredibly aggressive. It was very, very hard to stop people from making big plays back in 1.6. And now in Season 1, it's incredibly, incredibly hard to make a big play. Almost impossible if all your opponent wants to do is deny you a big play.
That, I do agree there. The setup for what we would refer to as a big play nowadays looks very different than 1.6 actually is. Sometimes a big play nowadays is like the biggest kind of play you'll see pretty much is taking a risk with a maneuver. Not even a charge or anything like that, killing a unit, but actually deliberately putting a unit in danger where you're like, I think I can hold up here with the right kind of situation, and if I can hold this position, I will then be in a dominant position to win.
Mhm.
And that is difficult to sometimes realize when, in 1.6 and to some extent in 2021 with the likes of the gunline offal stuff, where you could be like, haha, I can pounce on you and kill you now. But 2021 now is all about like, can I position well enough where it puts the onus on you to now be effectively aggressive? And if you have to be aggressive, being aggressive is actually quite hard. Like, I know a lot of people say, oh, like, defensive units die too easily, and defensive units aren't good. But being aggressive requires resources. And if you don't have the resource in the right area of the board, there's a good chance that you probably can't do it. Like, you'll try, and you might get lucky. You'll try, and it might work out for you. But most of the time, it won't. So yeah, that's another thing as well. When it comes to learning, and I guess the last point I would definitely make on this is learn your own resources. Like, actually learn what resources that you have available to you. You know, not all of the things that you have available to you are going to be good or bad because you looked at them and said, oh, that gives me XYZ. That's good. And not everything you look at is that doesn't do anything, it's bad. Sometimes, I mean, look at the effect it has on your list and your kind of play and go, we can sit here and say why Final Strike is good. Final Strike is predicated around a bad thing happening to you. You know, I lost a bunch of guys. That's a bad thing. But that has, obviously, Final Strike a very good card in that it has an effect on your opponent that they might not have accounted for, they might not have thought about. And that surprise can be very important at the right time.
Or
you know,
even in the total inverse, which is
yeah.
it's a thing that they have to continuously think about.
Yeah.
Which is they never actually want to be too successful, whereas obviously that's a counter to normal thinking, which is you want your attack to be as good as possible. You want to throw everything you possibly have at it, because why would you not want this action to be as successful as possible? I would say the same about some people take it too far or whatever, but like it's the same with critical blow, for example.
Oh god.
And particularly critical blow and weaken tokens, right? Because like there's a weaken token. Let's say somebody hits on threes with crit blow, they charge in, they hit, they do some hits, they re-roll their attacks, bang. There's some crits, there's some hits, there's no misses. Averages say you should roll every dice again, and that will be the least number of hits. But there are times where what you fear is the worst case situation, and so now you're scared to even use the weakened at all, or maybe you're scared that you should only re-roll the sixes because you don't want the attack to get worse.
Yeah.
Right. And so the crit blow does more than just the double sixes that it gives you. It makes your opponent not even want to utilize all the rules and options that they had, because something which should be only positive your opponent in 99% of cases now has a risk factor attached to it.
It
now
is.
has a possible chance that it can become worse. And that's the same thing with anything which rebounds an attack or like has a psychological effect, which is you're now afraid of your own attack being too successful. And so cards like that can have much bigger impact than just the number of wounds that they actually do.
It is actually funny that you mentioned that, because I distinctly remember a time when you'd charged. I want to say you charged. Was it a unit of Poor Fellows from Bloodraven or something? And you generated, I
Yeah,
think,
sounds right.
8 hits with Flayed Men. Now, 8 hits with Flayed Men is not great. Not great news for the Poor Fellow player. But 8 hits, you're probably going to roll a 6. Like, in 8 dice, rolling 1/6 is not going to happen, but it might happen. And then you have to crit fail the panic to die if you don't fail everything. So the chances of dying, it's not unlikely, but it's also not high. Like, you're not definitely dead. And then Carlo, and then I think Bloodraven decided, you know what, I'm going to make him do the rerolls of the weaken token. And Carlo rolled like 6 crits or something on the reroll. Because
It wasn't that many, because I
Was it not?
remember I didn't actually kill the unit.
oh, it was something
I
crazy.
actually
Then.
entirely failed to kill it, even with the morale test.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the only thing that actually made it stick out, it wasn't wildly unlikely,
Mhm.
was that before I rolled, I said, "Don't worry, I'll roll more hits this time."
Yeah.
And 8 hits became 9 hits when he weakened me. He
Yeah.
did actually, and you know, it's statistically unlikely and it's statistically the right choice.
Yeah.
But you could actually say that if all he wanted to do was survive in that situation, he was probably statistically best just telling me to re-roll my 6.
Yes.
Because then anything but a 6 made him impossible to die.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, you know, you'd have to really go into the deep dive of the maths whether or not you're more likely to roll 9 hits on a native roll, or am I than I am to, you know, not to get a 6?
Mhm.
Is that less than 1 in 6 chance? But yeah, I mean, like, it's those things, that rules that do more than their averages can
Yes.
have psychological effects. Is quite important.
Yeah. Cool. Any more points on learning? Apart from just analyze your own games first and foremost, if possible. Make mistakes, look back on those mistakes, learn from those. If you haven't got your own games, other people's games are fine as well. You know, if you actually sit down and analyze them as well. Is there anything else? Easy, fast.
I guess. Well, I guess it's important to understand how good you want to be.
Yes. Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
I really do think that it's important to understand how good you want to be, and to understand that those things don't happen by accident, right? Like, if you know, I think lots of people just like have maybe in the back of their mind, like, oh, I would like to be world number 1. Like, have you actually thought what that means? Like, you understand that Mikhail, the world number 1, he plays song like every single day, right? Like, he plays song for 4 hours a day, right? Like, do you want to play song for 4 hours a day? Right? Like, really, genuinely, do you want that? Right? Like, you know, I play a lot of sport, and I'm actually, you know, somewhat retiring from. I'm in the process of retiring from sport, because at some point, like, you know, like, you have to, particularly when you've been at the pinnacle of something, only those who've been at the pinnacle of it understand, like, the sacrifice that it was to be there, right? Lots of other people think that, like, it happened by chance, or that person just got lucky, or whatever, right? You have to think, do I really want that as much as, like, that person is putting in? Do I care as much as that person cares? And I don't think, now, more so with sport than with Song of Ice and Fire, right? Like,
Sure.
There are sacrifices to be made to be XYZ, right? Now, if you want to be world number 1, I really do think that, like, really, it's not fucking chess, right? Like, nobody's making £1 million. No, you know, like, it's not you were fucking born with it, right? Like, and nobody's gonna beat Magnus because he's been playing since he was 4 years old or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Out of the womb, mate. Born with a chessboard.
if you want to be world number 1, you can be world number 1, right? But, like, you have to understand what that journey would look like,
Mm-hmm.
and what that learning is. And and at some point, like it's not enjoyable anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, like I've been world number one at a computer game before, and soon found that I then wasn't interested in maintaining it because like the work it took to become it was enjoyable. Then I was like, well, cool, I've done it. Now like, wow,
Never,
yeah, not interested
literally
anymore.
never again.
Yeah, like not interested anymore. Like I still play the game incredibly casually, but like I enjoy to play it and be like top 50 in the world, but like the workload difference between maintaining a top 50 standing versus like trying to be world number one is 5 hours a day or so of playing, right? Like and that's not enjoyable. And I feel somewhat the same about Song, which is like I don't care as much as I used to want to be like I don't want to put tons of work in to be better than I am, right? Like, and so I do think that lots of people should decide like how good do you want to be? And if you actually really make an active decision about how good you want to be, and then decide what it will take to get there, then you will get there so much faster than if you would just generically want to be better at something. Yeah, it was Hello Kitty Island, Luke. Yeah.
Yeah. World number one, mate. He's got that handbag collection down to an absolute T. I don't know what Hello Kitty does anymore. All I remember those little purses you could buy, and that was it. Yeah. No. Yeah. I have nothing to add to that. That's just true. And sometimes, and the message to kind of all the other people watching and things like that. Sometimes you just want to get better, like better than I currently am. I want to get better, and that's absolutely fine. But you have to decide what aspect of the game you want to get better at. And a lot of people have actually. I've seen it more recently on Discords where people have actually said, and actually Dan, right? Dan said it either this weekend or last weekend in our group. He specifically said, "I want to get better at list selection." And that is a defined skill that he can literally get better at, that he can measure his improvement at. And so him being able to identify that as something that he perhaps isn't as, or doesn't think he's as good at, allows him that kind of win when he can go, you know what, I actually think I understand this better now, and I am better at this. And he will become a marginally better player for that.
I think that if you just generically want to be better, then what you need to limit or put an understanding on is a time scale in which you want to be better. I think you need to dedicate an amount of time and be like, all right, in 3 months' time, I want to be an amount better, and I'm gonna, like really try for 3 months to be better at the game, in X capacity, Y capacity, and then in 3 months I'll decide whether or not, like I did improve, whether or not improving was fun and I want to do it again for an amount of time. I think that you don't just happen upon these things. You have to. My mindset is that like you have to choose these things, and if you are just happening upon them, the people who are choosing to do it actively are gonna, are always gonna do better than you.
Mm-hmm. They'll happen on those things just as often, if not more faster. Okay, cool.
Mickey was in chat saying not so much, but I think
not
he's
as much as he
bullshitting
used
there.
to.
I mean, other than the fact that he just lost, which I was spending all the time in the build up to this watching him lose, and I knew that one was coming. I mean, he plays like 500 games in the past year or something, right? There is no way that he doesn't play for
437 since what 2021 drops, basically. So what, a year and 6 months, call it, roughly speaking.
Yeah.
So a year and 6 months, 400 and.
It is like a game a day.
Yeah.
And those games have to be 2 hours a day, like at least.
Usually.
Time between building your list, list selection, preparation for a game, if it's like any kind of TTS tournament game, you will have thought about it for at least 20 minutes before the game started. You thought about which list to pick. There are so many hours involved in the sheer number of games that he's played. I can't imagine. It can't not be 1,000 hours, or 10,000 hours, or whatever the hell. 1,000 hours, yeah. It has to be at least 1,000 hours. Play 500 games.
I mean,
to have been.
For reference, he's playing on average 0.8 games per day, roughly speaking, on average. Which means that on a normal 7-day week, he's probably playing 5 to 6 games, almost guaranteed.
Recorded on stats.
Yeah, just recorded on stats.
Probably he's probably a player who plays 95 to 99% of all his games on stats, but
yeah,
they're just the recorded ones.
Oh god, that's the old argument. I play more offline, right? And you go, cool, great. Does it show? So yeah. Anyway, all right then. The other topic we wanted to discuss, and it is brief, and I'm not going to spend a long time on this one, and it is actually a topic that myself and Carlo have probably both dedicated a complete and utter lack of time to, actually, and that is a discussion a little bit on the meta, and we're only going to cover this briefly, and that is the somewhat disturbing, maybe concerning, not sure, haven't really thought about it, don't know where it's going, but rise of Harmonella, who is now overtaken Eldon quite comfortably. He is on a upward trajectory of not quite stratospheric levels, but it doesn't take you much to say over the last 50 games that is an upward tendency by quite some way.
Mance, battle endurance is what the current power rankings say.
Yeah. Mance.
I mean, rip Grey Worm.
Oh god. Where is Grey Worm? I just want to see how bad Grey Worm. Do you remember? Can we just point out that Grey Worm used to have.
Is Grey Worm the only other battle endurance in the game? Are they the 3 battle endurances?
No, Great Walrus, who's up near the top because free folk.
Fuck off. As if free folk got. I didn't even know they did. Why bother? Why bother when you got man?
To be fair, at least battle endurance on free folk is crap because all the units are pretty easy to kill.
Yeah, exactly.
But Grey Worm is down in 66th place in comparison. Remember his? Yeah. Can I just point out his battle endurance used to be better. God, True. And he's still down there. Anyway, yeah, Harmonella, right? Is there any? I have nothing really to say about it other than he's clearly good, and Martel deck is pretty good. I've got nothing else on it. I haven't thought about it at all.
It's the old thing, which is like I believe the stats. I believe that he's great. I believe that he's probably fucking amazing. It doesn't matter to me because in the UK we don't have him.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And it is a little bit like the Mance thing, right? Which is like, don't fucking worry about Mance being dominant if somebody in your area and your tournaments isn't dominating with Mance, right? Like, it's just not a problem, right? So this is why we haven't really discussed it, why Ulla's not a thing, because to me, Ulla isn't a thing. He's not out in the UK. He's not gonna be until like mid-July. I mean, probably a genuine Freudian slip there. I really probably won't come out till July. Now, mid-January is what we currently think Martels might be released in the UK. But honestly, at this point, I really am nervous that they've become the Red Cloaks as a whole faction, which is they literally might never turn up in the UK. I think at this point, it got to the point where I actually went to have a little look on Anytime to see whether or not they were available, because I did wonder whether or not, because I genuinely don't think that if you want them in the UK, I don't think you're going to be able to get them. Like, I don't think you're going to be able to get them for like another 6 months in the UK. Like, when they come out, they're probably going to sell out instantaneously. If they haven't already sold out based on pre-orders,
Yeah.
then I'd be kind of surprised. So, yeah, it's like this case that, like, to me, he's not an issue. He's not a thing. He doesn't. He's not a problem. But I will be super interested in LVO, seeing, like, they've had Martells now for quite a few months, enough that particularly if they get the latest set releases with the Knights and
Outriders
and the Dune Outriders and are Dune Vipers already out?
I
or,
think
whatever?
no, they'll be coming out at the same time. I think maybe.
Okay. Yeah, like if they get those additional units, then that whole faction, I mean, Ulla's proving that he already is in discussion as one of the best things in the whole game. Give them more options and things are going to become even more powerful. Whether or not it takes people by surprise because we haven't been discussing it, hasn't been international success. Like all international success has been Mance. Whether or not Mance players are already preparing to change and adapt to what they hopefully will at least have to do. Like, now, I don't hope that Ulla just becomes the new most dominant thing and is even more powerful than Mance. I hope that Ulla forces Free Folk players to adapt to a new style, which hopefully opens the door for other people to be able to make it a three-way race, a three-way triangle. I genuinely don't know much about Ulla's actual upper potential because I just haven't dedicated that much time to thinking about it, because he's not a problem that I have to face myself.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I've not really thought about his lists that much. I haven't really thought about him as a commander. I played, I think, 1 or 2 games with him, and I was like, okay, this guy's obviously very good. Yeah, like, I don't know how to assess him. I actually don't know how to assess him. I don't know kind of where to start because I don't have to think. It's really weird.
I agree with Matthew. Well, what I genuinely hope that what they are is just a massive, not auto lose, but huge problematic matchup for Free Folk, while not being a problematic matchup for the rest of the field, right? Be that because of Baelish, be that because of XYZ. But I hope for that because Free Folk have not got a single counter in the game right now, pre Martells. And so if there were a counter faction, which at the very least made Free Folk play differently. Now, unfortunately, the 2-list format means that Free Folk could possibly just put together an anti-Martell list, and then they still dominate everybody else with the same list anyway. But if Free Folk didn't become the thing that all dominant players wanting to win a tournament would run to, because they know that if they have to face up into Ulla, they'll just lose, then I think that that's good for the game. Like, whether or not it's good extremely long term, no, probably not. I think the Martells, my opinion already is that their deck is too strong. That they are everything that Lannisters wish that they were, effectively, which is they're just a total fuck you to play into. Really annoying. Like, they basically counter everything that you want to do. And I think that actually it might lead to quite a negative play style or like play experience if they're very dominant, because they're very much fuck you. in an edition where, like I say, doing big plays is
few and far between and important.
yeah, exactly. Very, very rare. Like
Yeah.
pulling one off is huge, and what they do is they shut down big plays. Like they shut down like so many things. Now that works incredibly well with Doran NCU as a whole strategy. Now, as Endline says, there are very strong counters to that, though. That's the thing. Like, I do believe that Doran has counters. He has counters in Lannisters. He has counters in Olenna Tyrell.
Yeah.
He has counters. There's technically counters inside of anything which can shut off NCUs or not make NCUs go to the board, right? So there are lots of worrying signs there. But I think in the intermediate period, Mance losing to it is not the worst thing that can happen to freshen up the game. And I think that everybody else has a better chance into it than they have into Mance. So if it became the new most dominant thing, because what it did was it wiped out Free Folk and had good games against everything else, then that is a better place than we're in right now.
What happens if it ends up being just as dominant, if not more?
Well, it depends if it has no counters.
Yeah.
If it has not a single matchup which is positive into it, then yes, it's just dominant, right? And that's the issue with Mance, right? That's the issue with Mance being so not positive on gameplay, is that there is not a single matchup where Mance isn't the favorite to win.
Mm-hmm.
So the ideal situation is that Ulla, almost definitely with Doran NCU, make Mance not the favorite in that matchup, but they are not the favorites into every possible matchup in the game because there are other things which shut them down. And then you at least have a triangle of things that you are trying to prepare for, matchups that you're thinking about, lists that you're trying to prepare for, two list formats that are interesting and exciting, rather than I'll just play this commander twice, I'll just do this thing twice, I'll do this 50 million times. At the very least, we might see Free Folk players adapt to bring an aggressive list, because now they're the ones having to make big plays, because they have to come out and win the game, because Doran will just win the game single-handedly against Free Folk if they don't do anything about it, because they can't Baelish, they have no hard on NCU shut off outside of like wildling diplomacy and stuff like that. So
yeah,
I also don't I don't see it. Yeah, I sort of agree, which is I don't necessarily see it happening. But I think that the period and the tournaments that are coming up, which have access, wide ranging access to it, LVO is the most obvious one that comes to mind.
Yeah, most recent, right? Or the kind of like next biggest.
Yeah, the next big thing, the US has wide access to Martells. Interestingly, US have never been the strongest Mance players, so it's very much an opportunity for Martells to go and take it. So we'll see.
Yeah. Cool. I thought we'd just touch on that because we haven't talked about it for a long time, and Anala has been creeping. And at the current trajectory, he's going to continue creeping. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But the faction as a whole also is creeping. There was some kind of standout negatives to start with. Basically, Ulla was good, and the rest of Martells weren't very good. But actually, what you're seeing now is you're seeing Martells on the whole are doing quite well. Yes, Harmon Ulla is separating himself from the pack, but he's not significantly separating himself from the pack as it stands. He may well do. He may well continue to significantly separate himself from the other commanders, and all of the other commanders are negative in faction, which is something comparative. So if that gap gets any bigger, then what we're actually going to talk about is not just the power of Harmonola, which is separated from the Martel deck, of course, but also what we can basically show is bad internal balance, which is where this is pointing to at the moment, is bad internal balance, which also isn't a good thing.
Yeah. It does seem like maybe a bit of a problem. Like, and interestingly, I don't remember. Like, I definitely think that we talked about Ulla, battle endurance being pretty key.
Yeah.
And set for charge being like his other really big one. What's his third now? Remind me.
He has set for charge, battle endurance, and the Oh, I'm gonna have to look it up. It's the card that is.
Whatever. It seems
Spiteful
way less
Truce,
significant
the heal.
than the other two.
Spiteful Truce, which is actually a really good card.
Oh right, yeah. Another good value play.
Yeah.
Plus he has Iron Resolve and
Supply Davos.
and
Davos NC. Davos attachment.
Yeah. Iron Resolve and Supply Aid. So I believe that, like, way back when, honestly can't remember. I think we pointed out that we think that he's gonna be
the best.
Strong.
Yep.
Yeah, the best. I didn't see him as being like wildly better than the rest of the pack at the time. I didn't look at it and just go, "Man, that balance is fucked." Maybe we did.
I don't remember.
It seems like such a long time ago that we saw Martels, but I think that it's a little bit surprising to me just how much stronger than the rest of the options he seems to be. And it's possibly due to the fact that, like, he works incredibly well with flayed men and incredibly well with neutrals. And maybe we can all hope that with some new future releases, the other commanders will find their place. But the reality is, it's probably not true. Like, he's just going to remain by far the best commander. But his early success is almost definitely built on the fact that, like, there is few units that are just better than flayed men in the game. That is just widely known, right? And there is basically not a single commander in the whole game who empowers and enables flayed men like he currently is, right? So he is actually just the flayed men commander. I think that a huge amount of his success is double flayed men, Harmon Ulla, myself. Like that is the list that I've seen that is just terrorizing people. You can't even charge them because they attack you before you do. You wait till the late game. They have battle endurance, door and NCU, scoring NCU points with left, right, and center, X, Y, Z. They're double heavy cavalry. They're very difficult to outmaneuver. They're very difficult to do anything. And then when you finally make a big play, like rising temperatures and whatever other cards I forget, we've got all sorts of stuff which give you disorderly charges, which make you attack on lowest dice. You make a big play, and the Martel base deck kicks in and says, nah, but you didn't actually make a big play. So I think, it's it's a whole package which is actually very neatly come together, and it's a real problem.
Not gonna lie.
See if it wins a tournament near you very soon.
I'm not gonna lie, but I really hope that the flayed men on horses, those things that have been so prominent in the game for about a century now, it certainly feels like 84 years meme. I really just hope flayed men. I hope they make the neutral deck better in the new patch. I hope they make neutrals a better faction to play. And I really hope that neutrals aren't carried by flayed men, because I really hope the game isn't carried by flayed men in the future. Like, I've got no problem with flayed men being a good unit. I just wish they weren't the best all the time, because it really has felt they've just been. I feel like a simple solution to list building is put in flayed men. Like, that's just a good. A good thing to do. And it's always been that case pretty much. And it just feels annoying. And I'm not saying this building is hard. but it shouldn't be easy to get a really good list. Like, a really, really good list shouldn't be, I just applied the flayed men button a couple of times until I couldn't anymore, and then I filled the rest of the points up. Yeah. That's just me, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, 10 or 15 points in 40 is a very natural, easy solution. 10 or 15% neutrals. Sorry.
Character locking them, perhaps.
25% neutrals, sorry. Currently 50% neutral. Yeah, I think the 50% neutral allowance is actually what really continuously makes neutrals under par. Because
Double flayed men Baelish. Oh, that's 20 points.
Yeah. Look, best and the third best. Cool. Let's one of them and two of them, please. I mean, I'd take 3 Peter Baelish if I was allowed, but I mean, you wouldn't. But
mate, why stop at 3? Why not 5? Fuck it. All right then. So, cool. Anyway, one of the other things we're going to talk about is events. Now, this has come up a little bit more recently because one of the people we know in our region up in the northeast, he's arranging some events, and we've spoken about it before, but it was more just like a reiteration of a couple of points. And that was about like what an event should be for, and kind of like basic suggestions from a perspective of Carlo's run some big events and done some stuff that I would say, I'm putting words in his mouth here, but I would say he's probably relatively proud of stuff that he's done. And so there's some things there, and also from like ultimately kind of like as a player, things that are liked and things that actually like I think perhaps has been a bit of a misconception that people think players like, but actually don't really care that much about, I think, most people. So yeah, event Carlo, in terms of like event organization and kind of like not just the organization of setting it up on that side, but also like players and prize support and like the back end of the event, the feel, if you will. Not like you have feelings, but you know. Where yeah,
talk about events in general.
Start from a TO's perspective. Start first of all, like tips or tricks you would give to anybody.
Well, okay, your first event is very difficult. Simple as. I'll not sugarcoat it. The first event is much harder. This like your second event is only 50% as hard as the first one was, and then it gets easier and easier after that. Of course, that's not necessarily true if like every event you're trying to be bigger and better than the last, but that just means that like if you want every event to be bigger and better than the last, you're going to have to put in the same amount of work as last time. You probably don't have to put in more work, right? Because you've already got a huge foundation of like what the initial amount of work was to get yourself like up and going and like kind of off the ground. So that first event is the most difficult one to do. So you shouldn't aim too high, right? Like you shouldn't aim to run US Nationals at Gen Con.
Mind you,
if it's your first event.
Maybe you should. Maybe that's what someone should do, because that might actually be a good target that's achievable. Because let's face it, from what we've heard, the organization side not strong.
No, so like I really would say that like running something small and local, and just like learning as you go, like trying to get people beyond like so you got like your immediate gaming group, the immediate people that come to the store, hopefully. Like I mean, like it I have to say it's going to be incredibly difficult to run your first event, and I don't really have much advice for you if you don't already have like say like 6 people who you can like rely on, that like you're gonna come, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, convince these 6 people. So if nobody else comes, we've still got an event, right? Which we can say like, hey, we played some games. Maybe next time we'll get more. But if you got that initial store, some people who play a gaming group, it could be 4, it could be 6, it could be a slightly extended group of like, say, 12 people, say 20 people in like a wider area who like maybe don't come that regularly. I mean, if you have a regular group of 20 people, then yeah, you know what I mean, whatever, like
That's a win.
you know what I mean? Like, right, like run an event for 20, 30, 40 people, whatever. Like, if you reach that number, then it will attract more people.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, if you got this group, which you hopefully can get to like maybe double digits, then what you need to do is you need to find a way to get all of them to come, and then that will hopefully give enough like encouragement for other people to come to the event, because hitting like initial critical mass of your first event is the most difficult thing, and selling this event, which is going to be really, really big, it's going to be 32 people and it's going to be across 2 days, and then like 6-7 people sign up, right? And then it like turns out that like nobody's coming, will set you back much further than if you just tried to run an 8-person event and you managed to get 6-7 people to turn up, right? So you have to take it step by step. You have to like understand the community that you're trying to reach, and you have to go out there and reach them. You have to like one-on-one get your first 10 people through the door. You know, even with like, you know, A Song of Ice and Fire stats, Tourney ground, all these things. The last medium-sized event that I ran in Durham for 24 people, you know, like I, you know, set up a date. I was confident enough at this point that like I didn't need every single local player, so I just picked a date, right? Like I wasn't like, can you guys make it? Can you guys make it? But as soon as I picked a date, I was like, dead meta. I was like, guys, here's the event. Please come. Do you know what I mean? Like, reached out on like an individual level. Do you know what I mean? Like, Aaron, you know, Harbo, like all these people. I'm like, message them. I'm like, here's the date. Please convince the dead meta guys to come. And then I like message people from slightly further away. Message guys from Scotland who, you know what I mean, who like roughly said that they'd come last time. Message people from the Northwest who I know might come. Reach out and try and get myself to like that critical mass. And I think that that's the thing that a lot of people underestimate, which is you need to get that initial player base to then grow from.
Yeah, definitely. And as you say there, actually, there is a thing, and this is where, you know, Discord is very helpful. Not ironically because Discord is a light way of communicating, but Discord is helpful because you can meet what are likely, not always the case, but likely prominent players or people in different areas that may or may not be close to you. You know, if you're not going out to events yourself, which is sometimes the case for some people, you're not going to meet those players. You know, it's slightly different. You know, Carlo specifically, if we consider like the Northwest guys, he's been over to Liverpool for a couple of events over there. He knows the Liverpool guys quite well. You know, not the only person in our gaming group to know them quite well now. But if it wasn't for Carlo initially doing that, then that would have been a much more difficult link to establish. Now, thankfully, Discord does allow that to some extent. You know, we would definitely not know the likes of the guys in France or the guys in Germany or the guys in Spain if it wasn't through Discords. And so now, when it comes to more international level stuff, that same connection that can be achieved with a local tournament is still there, effectively, meaning it's a lot easier to get those people involved and invite them across, and you know, almost like Carlo says, they'd be personal. And that's, I mean, if we go back to the LGT this year, that's effectively exactly what Carlo did again. He was personal with the invitational system. It was a way of going, you're invited to the invitational, oh, and you're coming over to the UK, why don't you bring some mates? And I don't think a single person coming internationally came alone. I think every single international player in the Invitational was there with a couple of buddies. So he's not growing the event by one player, he's actually growing the event by 2 or 3 or 4. And those little groups, so that one-on-one effect that you have can actually spawn into being 4 times bigger than your one-on-one effect. And then you have like mental groups like the Italians where there's like 50 million of them. But yeah, like that all comes from that effort, right? That effort that was put in. And I think players appreciate that more as well from a, dare I say it, a charismatic perspective, is that they view that you think that they're important to tell about an event, to invite them to the event. So they're more likely to want to share that with their friends as well. So Discord allows that as well as physically going to events yourself.
Yeah, I'd say the second rule with entrance is 50% of the people won't turn up. Right, and I don't mean on the day, right? Like if you go around and like you're like, oh, 20 people play here, and like oh, Dead Meta, they've got like 12 people, and they've got, and then you count it up, and you're like, oh wow, there's 50 people. I'm gonna have to run a 64-person event. No, there are 50 people. At very best, 25 of them are going to want to come to this event on this particular weekend, right? Like whatever you think your player base is, unless these people are absolutely fucking thirsty for a Song of Ice and Fire, half of them are not coming. So don't overestimate what your player base is. It's so unlikely that even if they want to come, that they'll all be free on this one date that you've given. Oh, that's a quick aside, which is you can't crowdsource your date. You can't bend over backwards to like fit everybody in. You have to work around a date far enough in the future that like if people want to come, they will make time for it. You can't like show at hands who can make it this weekend, who can make it that weekend, who can make it whatever weekend. Like you've gotta pick your date, put your flag in the sand, and say, guys, like please come to my event and help make it successful.
Going back to what you said initially, if you're doing your very, very first event and it turns out you've booked it on a date where 2 of your club of 4 can't make it, and it is 6 months in advance, I would definitely suggest rethinking it in that case, because you've just lost 50% of a player base that you kind of definitely need to be there to help promote and to support it. So I'm 100% on board with Carlo. Just pick a date and go with it, but do pick a date, not just like completely at
your
random.
very first one, like if like I say, going back to that initial point, like you'd like to hope that there are like this initial 4 people or something that you can like guarantee will be there. Like you can check with them, like, oh, like can you do this weekend? Will you do this weekend? The question should never be phrased though as like,
which weekend?
What weekend's best for you?
Yes.
Right. That question is no, because everybody's answer will be different, because everybody has a different best weekend, and then they'll be offended that you didn't pick the weekend that's best for them. Yeah. So what you say is, here's when it's going to be. Can you make it? If like too many people say no, then you might have to change your date. But roughly speaking, you just need to pick a date and go with it, and you need to be way further in the future than you think it needs to be. Like even a small event, like it's got to be like 4, 5, 6 months ahead, right? When you're first initially gauging, can you come? Are we going to have numbers? Even if we're just talking about 16-person, 24-person, and then you can put together like, okay, I've decided the date, I've done whatever. Like, okay, like 4 months in advance, I'll start like
broadcasting,
maybe advertising it, maybe like broadcasting it to people once I've locked down, like, it will be a 40-point event. It will have this many people. It will have this many rounds, because those things, they need to be pretty locked in before you announce it to the wider world. And ideally, I also think that you want to have had conversations warning people that it's coming up, before you announce it, so that then when you initially announce it, the response is very positive. Already people are saying, oh yeah, that's the event I've been waiting for. Yeah, I'll sign up. You've already gone and talked to Dead Meta and said, look, I'm going to run an event in like 6 months. Will you guys come? It's going to be XYZ. It's going to be blah, blah, blah. Are you interested in? You know, like speak to people further away. They're not all say yes. You announce it and suddenly your 16 tickets, your 24 tickets, 10 of them go straight away, and it creates a little bit of
FOMO. Fear of missing out.
FOMO, obviously, but like, you know, like immediacy about the need for people to decide if they're going to go. The worst thing that can possibly happen is people believe that your event couldn't possibly sell out, so that 2 days beforehand they still think, oh well, if I wanted to go I could decide, and then you'll end up with like 20 people, all of which are like, well, if it gets successful I might jump in on it at the last minute, and they all could turn up and it would be successful, but they're all waiting for somebody else to sign up before they think it will be successful. And so that's why, like, I really do think that you need to plan these things in advance, have these personal conversations so that initially your events look successful and are successful. You know, they're not just fake look successful. You've guaranteed an amount of success. You've guaranteed an amount of entrance. And yeah, so I think that, like, so these conversations and your knowledge and connections to the community are incredibly important to grow an event. It is difficult to do it unless you have like an active communication with the player base that you hope will turn up.
Mm-hmm. I guess that moves from the actual organization. There's also, as I think Carlo once put it, did you call it like it's like herding cats? Sometimes getting players to turn up to events, or certainly for online events, can be exactly like that. But yeah,
yeah, online for sure.
But yeah, right, it can sometimes be like herding cats. We have a player in our group who, I swear, has memory issues, because you tell him information and it is genuinely like you've never told him information before, and then you realize it's like, hang on, you were going to be like player number 10 or player number 12 or player number 16, and I'm telling you the night before, like, have you got your armies and stuff sorted? And they're like, what? Like, they've completely forgotten that an event is even going on, never mind it's happening in the room they're going to be stood in tomorrow. That can happen. Do send reminders out, even if it's just reminders. And like, you see it a lot with some of the guys who they just say, look, this event's coming up, we're sold out, but you know, you might want to follow along, or you might want to try and get on a waiting list if there is any issues, whatever the case may be. So do that as well, you know, promote the event as an event that's happening. Because actually the other thing as well, this is just from a personal perspective, I like to see events being promoted, because it in my opinion, it makes the game look active. And then that is a good show for the game. And it doesn't matter if you say, look, our tickets are sold out, but it's still going on. Why don't you come down and meet the community still? Yeah, cool. You know what? I live 10 minutes walk away. I might walk down and just say hello to people. You know, that has value. So yeah, do think about that side as well. The event itself, then, obviously, let's not insult people's intelligence here and say find a venue. You will need a venue. That should be fairly obvious. But obviously, pick an appropriate venue for the size, all of that kind of thing. But one thing I'll say is, and this is, I think, one thing that sometimes people forget, do pick a venue where travel, especially if you're looking for people slightly further afield, is easier. There have been a couple of occasions, not so much with Song. Actually, Song's been pretty good for me, I think. But there have been a couple of occasions back when we used to play Frisbee events, certainly, Carlo, where some of the venues, you're like, I get that you need a field to play on, but I have literally no idea where this place is. Like, it's nowhere near a city at all. It's in the middle of some random village outside of another town that takes 5 hours to get there by any public transport, or 6 hours to drive there. Don't try and work that one out. There have been some sketchy places where I have just felt like I have no idea where I'm going at this point. Thankfully, Song doesn't need big fields to play, so that's less of an issue in inner city spaces. But yeah, do pick a venue where people can get to it.
I mean, like a store is gonna be like
Yeah.
90%, 90+% of like where people will host it, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, you'd hope.
there are a lot of things required. You need 4x4 foot tables. Realistically, you need 6x4 foot tables, which are actually pretty rare. For a lot of things will be more like 5x3 or like 6x3. The chances of somebody having a 4 foot wide table doesn't really happen by chance. Like they are in gaming stores. Mats, the spaces of that size, like they exist as like halls, but like the amount of other things that you're then going to have to prepare makes it incredibly hard to run your first event. So like your first events, your early events, are almost flat out definitely going to be within a store or within a gaming club, which like already like plays very, very regularly. And that means that their locations are probably already, like very accessible, because why would they exist like outside of those places?
Yeah, definitely.
But it is worth bearing in mind that like the more central and more accessible, well, not central, like you don't actually want things to be right in like a city center town, but like the more regional kind of like participation that you want to get, like you have to consider how easy it is to access this place that you're running an event. It can make a big difference. It is actually one of the major problems with like basically us being in Durham, which is we exist further north than a lot of people are willing to travel, right? Like, so I traveled an hour and a half down to Leeds, and people were willing to come right from down south to get to Leeds, but nobody outside of like one or two incredibly keen song players would be willing to travel an extra hour and a half beyond that into what they then consider to be like absolute no man's land north. Like we are basically at the Scottish border as far as they're concerned. Whereas like Leeds is just a way more centralized city in the area, so it can attract a much bigger player base and like has a much bigger upper bound of what it could achieve. Now, they're actually far more limited by how big that store and that venue is. Do you know what I mean? Like, so like in Durham, like even in our club, like if I really wanted to and had kind of like the continuous growth towards and belief that we could achieve it, there's nothing stopping us running like a 64-person event here, right? But the last time I ran, it was hard to get to 24, and it was hard to convince people to travel because people don't want to come to the city where we're in. Also, there aren't loads of hotels and easy options for people to stay and all those things. So that makes our venue not perfect for those problems. So that's probably pretty like non-negotiable for like you just have to understand the limitations of where you are trying to run it and what impact that may or may not have on players, and whether or not you're correctly situated to be like catapult yourself to be the biggest and best event in the local area, or if you're always going to have to understand that like you're not ideally situated, and so you need to like cater more to the more local player base and just try and enjoy and run good small events.
Yeah, definitely there. I guess the only other thing to talk about, because it has been so actually talked about a lot, but is actually people discussing prize support, for want of a better term. And I think I want to dispel a myth, and I think we have mentioned this before on Tourney Ground, but like there's a lot of people out there who I think actually probably agree when they say product for the game is nice. Yeah, cool. But it's probably not the prize support that most people are interested in, actually most of the time. Because unless it's completely new stuff, the chances are they've had the opportunity to make the purchase if they want. And let's face it, we live in a hobby which it's not cheap. Now, that doesn't mean that giving away prize support therefore is bad or anything like that, but most people who are deciding to be in the hobby do have the ability to buy an army. Like, they don't make a purchase of a starter box, be in the hobby, and then that's it because they can't afford an expansion box for the next X weeks. Yes, they might only buy one thing a month, so product for those people will still be good. That's a month's worth of game for them. But if you consider they've probably been playing the game for a year, they probably have most of what they want for their faction already. Now that is a bit of an assumption, because newer players don't necessarily have that. There are some players who still really like product, but for a large proportion of the player base, product is not really a big driver as a gift or as a reward. As Carlo said last week about Leeds, it's little things that make a big difference. Really little things. We got them for free, right? We got these completely for free when we went to Always Winter. But these little chairs, Carlo. Now you've seen this, Carlo. I know you have. How much use do these get out of them?
Yeah, I've seen lots of people from Always Winter use them. Yeah, they've been incredibly successful.
Yeah, dumb little chair. Amazing. We use them all the time. We use them down Friday. It's like a standard, isn't it, to have Friday night? My little mammoth sculpture for the same thing that I got from Always Winter. Just incredible use out of. And yet it's just a little token, really. That's all it is. Just nice. Then there's also other stuff.
Yeah, I think so again, that comes back to this, shall we say, issue or like underappreciation for like basically there is a lot of effort that a TO can put in because those chairs didn't just magically appear, right?
No.
Like they were, I mean, are they plastic or I don't know? Are they resin?
I think they're plastic. I think they're plastic printed.
Anyway, like they're a 3D print, right? Like I'm pretty 99% sure. I'm not even entirely sure if they're printed in that color plastic or if they're all painted, right? Like one or the other. But the point is that like the effort to put together 64 of them and then give them out on the day is not zero, right? Like, yep. And but all effort is nearly always appreciated. But like you're gonna have to put in a lot of like small amounts of effort. Like every little extra thing is like quite they add up real fast. Like let's put it that way, right? Like by the time you've thought about like how can I like put together some interesting little challenges and spot prizes? How can I give a thing to everybody? How can I do whatever? That will be a lot of work, and unfortunately a lot of it does kind of like, although like people will enjoy the event, like a lot of it goes underappreciated for like how much work a person puts into it. I do think that there's a sort of odd thing about events, which is like people somewhat mostly expect people to run them for free, and that expectation comes from the fact that there are people who are willing to do it for free despite putting in like like literally like 100+ hours work in preparation for this event, right? And yet they'll do it for free because they just do it for the love of the game, wanting to grow the community, etc. But that does create something of an expectation that kind of people expect, like that TOs will do these things for free, and that can be a bit of a problem because like people can suddenly be like, oh well, we all paid £10 for a ticket, like where's all the prize support? It's like you got there's 20 of us in this room. You got at least £200 for this event. Like, where's all that money go? And it's like, well, like I spent 200 hours on this event. Am I not allowed to have 50 quid left over and not spend it on one unit box and give that away? So yeah, I think you have to not be. The problem is you have to not be trying to do it for a financial gain. Like I honestly really like. Even stores like they're just doing it to like create activity in their store, even though they're a business. I can't even really see how they're making any significant amount of money. Do you know what I mean? Like because the expectation there is that other people will do all this stuff and this work for free. You pretty much have to be willing to go into it. Now if there is some money left over, then do you know what I mean? Like absolutely pay yourself because it will help you want to do it again. And I think that that's the most important thing for the community, is that you also are happy about having run the event and you want to run another.
Yeah.
But like there is a somewhat unfortunate expectation that effectively like you will go unpaid. If anything, you will probably spend money out of your own pocket for some of the prizes, and yet people will want you to put in a lot of work to make the event good. And unfortunately, you're kind of like you're being compared to other people who have done that in the past and are willing to do that again.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. It's very much a labour of love. Now, the last time I organised any kind of big event and things was for anything like this was quite some time ago, and it wasn't for Song. But yeah, the effort you put in is always going to not really be reflected in the event itself. The event itself doesn't really ever show the amount of effort you put in, and that's just something you have to accept. And as Carlo says, there's also some things where you will lose out. That doesn't mean that you can't, and I'll use the term very loosely here, turn a profit from an event. You can do that. The problem is it doesn't really work for the small events. Small events that won't work for, and the only real hope you'll ever have is big events for that to happen. And when I say big events, you're talking 64 plus events. Will you ever really make any money from? I'm not suggesting here that it's not possible in other sizes, but it's just not. It's weird because it's not really within the culture of wargaming events for the organisers to make a significant piece of money, which is actually very interesting because exactly right for me and Carlo in sports, actually the whole purpose of running an event is a financial gain. Like that is quite literally why some people in certainly sport frisbee that we play, that's quite literally why people run events. They're like, we need to make some money, so we'll make an event, and that's crazy. That is absolutely crazy that people think that differently compared to what in Song is it's going to cost me money to run an event.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, coming right back to the start, which is like your second event will be much easier than your first, right? So like if you can run your first successful event, the second one, you can hopefully count on like maybe like 50 to 75% of those people coming back. So you've already got yourself a decent chunk of the player base, and hopefully it won't be loads more work, or like basically it'll be less work, hopefully, for you to grow the event to be bigger, right? And bigger and bigger. But like these things can't be rushed. Your plans can't be too big. If you try and shoot too big too early, then you'll end up with a not positive player experience. You'll probably end up out of pocket because you've like paid for too big of an event venue or something like that, right? So these things have to be allowed to grow over time. A whole series of events which are slightly closely linked or like happen every month or happen every 3 months or something like that can be brilliant. They can bring people in on the regular. At that point, maybe you can think like, oh, I could start making £100 out of each one, and then by the end of the year, between 10 events, I've actually like made some money that like. But you can't start with that plan. That's the problem. Like you're never going to be successful if your initial plan is, oh, I'm going to make £1,000 out of running 10 events. What you need to do is you need to run an event, be successful, then try and run a second, then a third, and then hopefully it can start to become a series, and like these things can come together in a far more organic way. If you aim too big too soon, then that can be a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my real main advice, which is like start at a manageable level and just like and go from strength to strength. It's one of the reasons why the LGT stayed at like 128, and it's a big question for the next event organizers whether or not they think the event is ready to move past the 128 barrier. It's like it definitely we could have sold like 140 tickets. I don't think that would have necessarily meant that we had 140 people. It would have been this horrible
Can't we?
gray area,
Can't
this
we? Yeah.
horrible no man's land of like whether or not more than 128 turned up, and then suddenly you have a problem around 7 rounds, 8 rounds, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But we might have been able to sell like 150 or something at some point. It could have looked like, but I would much rather run a very successful 128 person event and then look at what next year can look like, how successful that can be. But on a much smaller scale, it's like run a 16-person event, see how successful it is. It's much better to sell out a 16-person event than to get 18 people to this event that you said was going to be 32 people. From that 16, look to grow and grow and grow, and maybe you make it to that 64-person event, and then you can, start selling out because, maybe you can actually make some money now. Maybe you could be charging £50 a ticket, and who knows? You could make yourself a little bit of cash to eventually pay back the many hours that you put into growing it to this level.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always going to be an afterthought after you've grown something successful without trying to make a financial gain from it. Unfortunately, that is the way things are going to be, because other people are out there trying to do it for non-financial gain, so you'll always be kind of compared against them.
Definitely.
And it becomes a standard. The unfortunate reality is it means that all of our events are run by amateurs. Luckily, amateurs who enjoy stuff, amateurs who put a lot of love into it. But amateurs all the same, you miss certain amounts of quality based around people doing things professionally. It's one of the things I do very much appreciate and like about the LGT, which is at the very top level, it is being run by somebody who is making significant amounts of money out of the 1,000 people who are coming. Now, he delegates these games out to, individuals in each different gaming system who are people doing it for the love and not making money. But at the top level, there is a very high level of professionalism there and a person making significant amount of money that they deserve to, because the whole event takes a full 6 months to put together of, genuine hard work.
He's already started for next year, right? Like, he's literally already started for next year.
Yeah, of course.
It's a year-long, almost a year-long process for him. Definitely. Last point of note, the most important thing is not how good your event is in terms of players. It's not how important the event is in terms of player skill, who wins, who loses, anything that. The most important thing, which again should be fairly obvious, is that the players have a good time. Like, that's actually the best thing you can have for. If players enjoy the event, people will go, that was a good day out, I'll go back. This is evidently clear when we look at Chelmsford. Chelmsford Bunker Group, we talked about this series of events they're running. Now, I've not been to the Chelmsford Bunker Group. I'm told it's quite good. But, they ran the events as kind of like a monthly get-together. And it's just gotten bigger and bigger and grown because those players go, oh, you coming to the next event? Yeah, the last one was great fun. And that's players spreading the word of a good event, just like any advertising, any marketing, having an event where people just enjoy themselves is way more important than nearly any of the other things when it comes to the day itself. That's always important, and it should always be at the forefront of your mind. If you think a decision you're making that isn't to do with organization in terms of like getting things like sorted, like a venue, that stuff's important. But if you think the decision you're making doesn't really make a difference to the player base in terms of how they're going to enjoy it, then sometimes that decision is probably not as important as it needs to be, or you're making it out to be. There are, of course, decisions that will be very important, which the player base won't know affect them, and those things are, of course, very important indeed. But yeah, is there anything else we want to say on events?
No, I think Give it a go.
Yeah.
Give it a go. Honestly, I've made it out to be like some like monumental task or whatever, but like, I think just formalizing even what is one of your like normal gaming nights into just a slightly more significant one. A really simple, easy first step. Get the 4 people, 6 people, 8 people that you always play with to play in a 4-person, 6-person, 8-person event. Just so that everybody's kind of a bit hyped about it, and then put some effort in to making it exciting to be the winner of that, exciting to kind of like have some kind of achievement out of it. That could be, what I mean, anything. It could be anything. If you think the group's too competitive, it could be an ELO event. It could be who can, a prize for whoever kills the most units. It could be prize for XYZ, right? Like, only you know your community and your gaming group and whatever. So try and make something that will make them excited in the game and give it a go. That's the last bit of advice.
Which do point out that all the people running campaigns who think that campaigns is that kind of source as well. That has just as much value, even though it's not the events in which we're talking about normally. Those things have just as much value as everything we've just said. People excited, and Timu, right? Timu in Finland, he does a lot of that kind of thing, and it grows his group and it works. So yeah, do what works. Enjoy yourself. The important things. Right. So I guess to finalize the topic of events, should we look at some tournaments? Yeah. So we've got Season 1, Episode 1, which I'm going to guess is... Or S1, E1, I'm guessing is Season 1, Episode 1, of the Forges of Destiny, a private tournament on TTS. So I'm going to guess it's like a weekly league type thing if it's running for February, over 6 players. Cool. I really hope that goes well. I know it's only a small event, but I think things like that are always super interesting because they just run for so long, and there's these weird narratives that you can see if you ever follow them closely. It's quite fun. Right, anyway, we've got Winter at Krastas, number 2, happening in Sweden. Sweden group are back. Good to see. Beyond the Wall 1, the first of what I'm hoping is a new series of events happening in Dortmund in Germany. We've got Team Pivnica Tournament and Painting Competition, Volume 2. That'll be the Team Pivnica guys over in Warsaw. I hope that goes well. 30 players. Pretty good. Goblin Trader running another event over in Barcelona. This is... V Tourney. Is this the 5th tournament they've run? I've definitely seen the Goblin Trader on the list before. I hope there's a new event. Fantastic.
I'm not sure. There is a Spanish guy called Vitasia, right? I don't know if that's where the V comes from or...
No idea. Let me guess. Mikel's going. In Barcelona, right? Mikel's based in Barcelona. Maybe he's not. He's not on the list so far. Maybe I'm wrong. Oh well. What else have we got? We've got Sleigh Bells Toll for Lannister Heads, which is a great name, in Dragon's Lair in Houston, Texas. Houston Hype. That's the event that's going on in Houston. Imperial Minis. You're involved with it, I'm guessing? I don't know if you're running it or if you've just been promoting it heavily. It does ring a bell. I really hope it goes well. Barcelona shop. Okay, Mikel. Cheers, mate. We've got another negative ELO event happening in person in Valencia, Spain, which is actually very interesting to see that kind of again we're seeing something that was invented for a TTS scene that has now been kind of converted and just said, you know what, sod it, we'll do it in person because it will still work. Hyping. Cool. Good stuff, Imperial. We've also got the first tournament of Toscano, which is happening in Prato, Italy. Great. I can't say I've heard of any of those things, but awesome. Another Polish event happening by insert pronunciation there. I'm not even going to try. That's hard. By de Gozkzs. There you go. There's my terrible one for the week. And that's running this weekend as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 events this week, with 2 Poland and 2 Spanish. So Spanish trying to really steal that crown from the Polish this week. And yeah, I really hope those all go very well. I hope everyone enjoys their weekends away if they are attending any of them. If you're not, I hope you enjoy your week's events. Carlo, you've got a negative yellow game this week, right?
Yeah, I have. Oh God, what's his name? Mikhail's friend. Ah, God. Naki.
Naki.
Who recently changed his stats name to the One, I think. Yeah, I'll be playing. Both of his lists are 7 activation Night's Watch again. So we'll see. I think it'll be harder than the last game because in the last game I had an incredibly dominant MCU setup over Mr. One. Yeah,
Mr. One.
That's what he changed. Yeah. So in the last game, after I'd spoken about how Elena would absolutely dominate Urine, and it would be absolutely crazy for Marky Mark to pick the Urine list, he had already locked in the Urine list. And so, unfortunately, his 6-point NCU got absolutely dominated by my 5-point NCU. And my 8 activations outmaneuvered his 7. There was a slightly dicey moment when I got a disorderly charge and I thought I was going to kill something and ended up engaged with Dario Swarm Bros that I thought were going to be dead. But after that, things got quite easy. So this will be a lot harder because, I won't have such tactics board domination or such advantage based off of like how strongly my tactics board wins. So we'll see whether or not I can make it through a lot more Sworn Bros and Night's Watch deck.
Cool. Awesome. I hope that goes well for you. I hope everyone's games go well this week and that everyone enjoys themselves. I'll do a quick reminder because we haven't said this in too long. Neutrals still aren't a faction. And we will catch you all probably next week where hopefully there's some news. I guess. We'll see. Is next? Yes, next week will be after the Thailand Expo from Simon, because I think that's happening this weekend. But hopefully we'll know something then. Maybe.
Okay.
We'll see. All right, guys.
Sounds like a recipe for disappointment.
I know, right? A recipe for disappointment. That actually did remind me, briefly. I did get my other map from the guys over at Fantasy Velt who did the stuff with...
Why was that a recipe for disappointment, Mickey?
No. It just reminded me that I've received it, that's all, as something that happened. The guys over with Tabletop Warden, so do check that out if you haven't already. It's quite nice. I like the colour. But yeah. Cool. All right then. Thanks a lot, guys. And we will hopefully see you with some news next week, I guess. Take it easy.
Ready? Aim!
There's too many.
Anyone see my mammoth?
Stumpy!